see any citation of that statute in subsection B, Mr. Chairman, Senator James?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, that's where it says that the person may elect to have the person's identity kept confidential and not disclosed to any person not employed by the Department of Audit, except when required by law. So, except when required by law would, if someone wanted to face their accuser, then that's when that would come into play.
So Senator Hicks, Senator James, I think I can help out here a little bit. Senator James had sent me an analysis from a member of staff, and it was a citation to the U.S. Constitution and the state constitution said if criminal charges are filed, you have the right to confront your accuser. And Senator James, I think what Senator Hicks is asking about, if I may, Senator Hicks, and I am as well, if you've ever been involved in these sorts of allegations in the workplace, far short of any criminal charges being filed, the first thing you do is you separate the parties, you interview the parties, you take statements, and in the course of so doing, this seems to say that you cannot let the person who is accused cannot know who's making the accusation. So the citations that Ted, the attorney, sent us relate to only if criminal charges are filed, but short of criminal charges, what we're looking for is the right in the course of that internal investigation for the accused to know who exactly is saying what I did and when did they say I did it.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, in that particular circumstance, that would, if there was nothing found, if there were no charges filed, then that person does have the ability to have their identity kept confidential for the simple fact that this is an anonymous program. If everyone is made to have their identity revealed, then people are going to be a lot less likely. Now, this is also very common language within all these other states to have this particular wording in there. So when the anonymous hotlines are created, that protection is put in there for people that give this information. And that's to encourage them, because if they feel that they're going to be exposed, then they'll become targets. And
Senator Hicks.
Senator James, and let's run through that scenario. So what's the ramifications for, show me where there's a penalty for somebody making a false allocation. Because here's what I'm concerned about. The structure of this bill right now could really ruin people's lives because somebody at work doesn't like the other person. So they just keep calling the hotline and saying, oh, they wasted money. They wasted money. At what point in time is there any penalty provisions for that person for making false allegations against somebody over and over and over again?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, yes. In subsection C on page 13, it says any employee found to have knowingly made a false report shall be subject to disciplinary action by an employer up to and including dismissal. Also,
page 13.
Yes, Mr. Vice President.
I'm on page 13. It begins, each employer shall post and maintain in each of the employer's establishments a conspicuous location and notice explaining. I'm not seeing the.
Should be at the bottom page under subsection C.
On page 13?
Correct.
On section 3, what line?
Subsection C.
I don't have a subsection C on page 13.
Senator James, we're working off of Senate File 65, 21 LSO 0043. Are you maybe on an earlier draft?
No, Mr. Chairman, I'll pull it up real quick. My apologies. It's at the top of page 13, right above subsection D. Is that what you-
Page 13?
Yes, it's still page 13. Is that? Then it'd be right, the paragraph right above that. Subsection D. On page 12. So I'm not sure what copy. So it says the
Okay, it's on page 12,
very last sentence.
began line 17 through line 20. Any employee found to have knowingly made a false report shall be subject to disciplinary action by the employer up to and including dismissal.
So where are you at? You're on page 12.
Page 12, beginning on line 17, last word is any, and continuing through 18, 19, and 20. Page 12.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I may just to follow.
Senator Hicks.
So when the allegations made, the investigations against the person that made the allegation.
Senator Hicks, could you pull the mic a little bit closer towards you, Karen?
Senator James, the way I read the flow of the bill, so when somebody makes an allegation, the investigation is into the person that the allegation was leveled at. So where is the investigation to make sure that somebody didn't make the false allegation? How does that work?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks,
Please.
while they're doing their investigation, they would be able to find this information out, whether it's true or false. And then at that point in time, if they figure out that it's false, that's when the punishments would come into play for the person making the false allegation.
All right, Mr. Chairman, if we can back up again to where was I at? On page 2 and back to our discussion there on subsection B. The way I read the way it's currently constructed, getting back to the due process rights, it says, so on line 20, page 2, it says, except when required by law, comma, the Department of Audit employee who discloses the entity of the person making a report under this section to a person not employed by the Department of Audit shall be terminated from the Department of Audit. So when we talk about those due process rights, those are afforded the way this is structurally wrote to the Department of Audit employee. I still can't find where the due process rights are afforded the person that the allegation was made against. And it may just be a structural component in here, but the way that currently reads, except when required by law, the Department of Audit employee. So it's specific in this language to the Department of Audit. I'm still trying to find out where the due process rights are for the accused to confront their accuser.
Senator James.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, under statute and under Constitution, once there's charges filed, they have that. But if there's nothing that comes of it, there would be nothing in place for that because there's already a punishment in place for that person for making those false allegations. And if there was something to come of it and they did make accusations and that person was able to be known, that would defeat the whole purpose of this anonymous hotline, and then that person would become a target, and they would more likely than not suffer the consequences of being known.
Mr. Chairman, just to follow up.
Senator Hicks.
Under a constitutional provision, I agree with you, but the statute was now in conflict with that because the statute says it says in all reports, all reasonable steps shall be taken to protect the identity of the person making the report. In addition, the person making the report may elect to have the person's identity kept confidential and not disclosed to any person not employed by the department. So that basically is conflict with what we just said in the due process rights under the Constitution to confront your accuser. And now we're writing a statute. In my mind, it looks like it's directly in conflict with what that due process is. So am I reading that wrong? We've said in a state law now that you do not have the right to know who made an accusation against you because their identity and that person is completely shielded from that because it's confidential information. So how do we rectify what we have in the bill with the due process rights of somebody in the Constitution? Are we writing a statute that's in conflict with that?
Senator James.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, I'm not sure where the conflict is. I'm reading it, a person making a report may elect to have a person's identity kept confidential and not disclosed to any person not employed by the Department of Audit. But the except when required by law, that's when once the charges have been filed, that'd be the required by law, because then there would be other situations put into place where then they would have the ability to face their accuser. So now during the initial part, when there are no charges filed, that circumstance would just make that person giving the information a target. So we're trying to prevent that part. So once the charges have been filed, then they have the right to face their accuser, because that's when something will actually come of it. Before then, it's only known by the Department of Audit. And that information is required to stay confidential until the charges are filed.
Senator Hicks, do you have anything? Senator Guru wanted to hop in, but I want to give you a chance to finish your inquiry.
And that's a curiosity, Mr. Chairman, if I may, is the way this works. A person making a report may elect to have the person's identity kept secret or confidential. So I'm going to turn you in for waste, fraud, or abuse, or one of those. And then I get to determine whether that information that I'm turning in about you is confidential or not. Why does somebody make an accusation against somebody that has committed a crime, if under the bill, determine whether your information gets to retain confidential or not? I'm trying to understand why we would do that. We don't do that in any other criminal court, is to let somebody that's involved in a potential litigation or potential action associated with their employment determine whether that information retains confidential or not. Am I reading that wrong?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, I believe you are, because it's only referring to the person's identity. It's not referring to the information.
Yeah, it is their identity.
Right. And so, yes, that is.
Mr. Chairman.
Sorry.
So I'm just trying to understand why, if I make an accusation against you that you've committed waste, fraud, or abuse as a government employee, why I get to determine whether your personal identity is confidential or not. You've just taken somebody to make accusations and put them in a tremendously powerful position over that person that you just made an accusation against. And I'm just curious as to, I've never seen this in any legal format in the 8 years I served on judiciary, where we allow somebody to make an allegation and then determine whether their identity is kept confidential or not. So I'm just trying to understand, why are we doing that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, the reason why we're doing that is because if the person's identity becomes available, then they become a target. And that will prevent people from actually doing the entire purpose of this program, which is to prevent the waste, fraud, and abuse. Because if they know that as soon as they say something that everyone's going to know who they are, then we might as well just keep the statute the same, just as worthless. This is going to add teeth. Right now, statute doesn't do anything, but this is actually going to make something of it to where people can actually feel safe when making, giving that information. Now, if something actually comes of it, that's when they can actually face their accuser. But until then, if nothing comes of it, then it all blows over, because evidence has found that nothing came of it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome.
Good morning. Senator, I have the same problem. I read this over and over again. And it just keeps going through my mind about, the laws that we have in the books, which you call worthless. I mean, you just did. You said they were worthless and ineffective and whatever. Yet every case you cited when you talked to us in your testimony before has either been prosecuted or in the midst of being investigated. I know a lot of times I hear in other venues, other places, I hear, well, you know what I'm talking about, this sort of thing, vague innuendos, kind of strips, little snippets of information, just kind of drifting around the room with no specificity. You know how to say that word. No specifics to it. And so then, but then I look at this bill and I don't know, I'm trying to figure out how it gets there. I have the same problem with my friend from Bags. It seems to go in circles and I think it has some unintended consequences. I'm just going to say it. I read this bill and I read it about 4 times and I say, why don't we just have a tip line and be done with it? And then let's see what it is that we're missing. Like I say, I appreciate the fact that this bill sees a problem. I don't know if it solves it, but it sure does seem like it's a big, bad problem when I read this bill. But then, like I see, it just keeps going around in circles. And so I don't know if it's just not ready for prime time and I'm just not smart enough, or maybe it's just so far beyond me, I don't know, which is always the probability that might be the highest. But I'm sorry, that's what I just need help with that. I need help with that.
Senator James.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Grew. So all those cases that I've cited happened after the fact, and they got prosecuted after all that damage had been done. This right here is to prevent it before all that damage is done. With the Medicaid situation that I referred to, that was in process of having that situation handled, but then government stepped in and fired him and his wife. And so they actually covered it up. And I do have evidence to prove that, which I already sent you guys. So, and he's actually one of the people testifying today. So you can ask him all the questions and he can explain everything. But this right here is to prevent the massive amounts of money that we've lost. This is prevent the waste that we have. This is prevent all the situations that are occurring within our government. This is to help with that. And this is to help direct the Department of Audit instead of going out and doing it on a schedule. And I don't know if you guys have seen the public funds website, but they don't do that many audits. And this would help really direct them to places where they need to do audits, because someone can say, hey, here's a situation, here's what I know, here's the evidence that I have. And then they, as professional auditors, can take that information and use it to determine whether or not it's worth going to audit. So that's what this is for, is a preventative measure. And then once anything is found, to punish the people that have abused their position within the government.
Thank you. Senator James, I just, because we do need to get to the testimony, but I've got to tell you, for instance, on page 2, which was the subject of Senator Hicks's inquiry, you said it's common in other state laws. Pieces of it are common in other state laws, I believe. And if there's various pieces, and there's just a lot going on in this bill, and I can see pieces and parts, it just doesn't hold together real well. So I'm not an expert in this area, but what happened in healthcare is this corporate compliance program started out after the big Pentagon scandals. And what they found is that employees saw things that weren't right, and they tried repeatedly to be heard. And then finally they pick up and call a government fraud hotline, and now the company's in trouble. And so what they found is the companies needed to do a better job of encouraging employees to report internally to keep them out of trouble and catch these things early. So then that spread over to the healthcare realm. And so through a national and a state trade association, I was very active in corporate compliance programs. Plus I was running a business. And so you had to understand, when this employee says that employee called somebody else this, or I'm being discriminated against my age, or this employee sexually harassed me, everything gets dropped, and then you go into investigative mode. And there's just a series of principles. One is, when somebody makes the accusation, the first question is, okay, I need to know something about the person making the accusation. Because it's very common, you can have one employee stealing, and when they feel like the gendarmes are getting close, they report somebody else for the stealing. Have you had that in your business? And so you always want to know a little bit about both, but then you separate the parties, and then you have to take the accused and the accuser, and you have to interview. And the person who is accused has to know what they're being accused of and who's saying it and why. And I don't know of any other way to do it. And so I've had people come to me and say, I want to complain, but I don't want anybody to ever know. And I say, I can't guarantee that. It depends. I'm going to listen to you, but I cannot guarantee you absolute confidentiality, because I will have an obligation to investigate it and tell me what you got on your mind. But I can't guarantee you confidentiality. I was just talking to a colleague out on the floor. They dealt with an accusation of sexual assault, and they had to interview the victim and the accused, and got to the bottom of it. It turned out it was not a case of sexual assault, but both parties knew who the other party's name was. And that's just one example of how it carries through. So I see bits and pieces and parts, but that association that was referenced the other day, where you and I got that report, I mean, I wonder if we wouldn't benefit from just starting, if LSO shouldn't have just started with a law from a state that was very well done, and start from that and then draft from there. Because I see a lot of elements, but it just I don't think it's going to get you where you need to go. That's just my reaction to it as I read it. So tell me a little bit about how LSO put this together, because I'm almost wondering if whoever the lawyer that handled it, I wonder if we shouldn't be asking him to help walk us through the bill, to maybe we're missing it there. I don't know.
Mr. Chairman, committee, so this bill was taken from last year when it passed out of the Senate, 25-5. A lot of the same wording. I added this same section was in there last year too. I didn't change that part.
What was the bill number last year?
Actually, no, I take that back. This part wasn't in there. My apologies. That part was not.
Okay.
But a lot of this was the same bill last year. I think, Senate File 70, I believe.
Okay.
And so this was a lot of the same language. All the definitions were the same. There was a few things that I added in there to give it more teeth, basically. That was for the safety of the people reporting the issue. And I also made sure that there was something if they did make false allegations. The part about that about being able to face your accuser, I felt the LSO attorney did a pretty good job of explaining how that would happen. Now, during the whole process, I don't see any right. But afterwards, after the charges are filed, that's when all the rights come into play.
Well, I think we'd better get on to public testimony. It's an important bill and it's an important concept, Senator James. So we've got some folks on the, Karen, we've got some people in the waiting room. How many do we have in the waiting room?
Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman, we have Patricia Bach from A&I. We have Justin Chavez from Audit. And we do have one other party. Let me get you the name. Mark Gaskell. I believe you have written correspondence from him as well, that are in the waiting room waiting to speak.
Okay. Well, let's start with the agencies first, and then we'll go to Mr. Gaskell, and we have some folks here too. We've got 2 people here, 4, 5. Okay, so let's, we've got the time. All right, thank you. Ms. Bach, welcome, thank you. You're gonna need to turn your mic on.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman. Thank you very much. I'm sorry about that. I appreciate, my name is Patricia Bach and I am the A&I Director. I think you have covered it expertly. A lot of the things that I was going to bring up have already been brought up. The one thing that I would point to, maybe 2 things that I would point to, is page 3, line 1. That is what I look at as automatic firing. The way that reads, it really doesn't take into consideration any accidental disclosure. If there's an inadvertent disclosure, that's concerning when you go through the personnel rules for the state. That process goes through the Human Resource Division. And if it's an accidental disclosure, in this case, I believe that this bill would require the agency to terminate. The other concerning area that I have that has not been discussed, at least I didn't hear the first few minutes, is what we're calling the page that audit has to put all the information on, including the name of an employee, what happened to them. We call it kind of the public shaming page. I'm concerned about that. But I do think, and I want to, Senator Hicks, I think your discussion on confidentiality was absolutely on point, and that was my other concern. So I will leave it there so that other people can testify. And I'll stand for any questions.
Senator Groom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Bach, I know you just kind of all rolled in a lot of HR stuff and stuff into your bailiwick, but when it comes to these types of things, allegations, what structure do you all have in place? If you want to talk just about A&I, because actually with leases, you have a lot of interface with the public, you have a lot of interface with a lot of dollars in a lot of different areas, whether it's insurance, whether it's leasing, all sorts of things. I'm sure that if there were waste, fraud, and abuse cases, you'd probably be as prone to see them as anyone else. What's the structure that you all have? Let's say I'm a state employee and I'm working in A&I, and I think that Joe sitting 3 cubicles down is doing something nefarious. And what's the structure? Just kind of walk me through. Give me a little flavor of it.
Chairman Hicks, Senator Guru, the structure is very, it goes through the Human Resource Division. Generally speaking, if there is a complaint from an employee about another employee, or even in a different agency, it generally starts through the Human Resource Division. So what happens is an employee will go to their supervisor, or they will possibly go to the director. At that point, you would bring HR in, depending on the complaint. If it's something similar to waste, fraud, and abuse, like this would be, which I think this is trying to couch, we would probably bring in any department that would be able to investigate that claim. So if it had to do with something under audit's purview, we would talk with the Department of Audit. Generally speaking, as Senator Hicks mentioned, the Human Resource Department always has that clarification in the beginning. Anybody who makes a complaint would certainly want to be anonymous. That's generally, I would say 90% of the time, they don't want their name out there. And we say, we will do what we can, but we can't guarantee that. So his description of the confidentiality is, like I said, on point. That is a conversation that we have on a regular basis. We will do what we can, but we can't guarantee you will be anonymous. If there is a complaint that comes into the Human Resource Division, and that is consolidated now, but even before now, the Human Resource Division handled complaints from other agencies for example, if there was a complaint about fraud or abuse, it would come into the Human Resource Division. We would involve the Attorney General's office. We would involve the governor's office. So anything like that automatically gets brought into a higher level of scrutiny. So that would be taken very seriously. It is taken very seriously at the state. So that's generally how those types of complaints would come, whether they're A&I, Department of Audit, any other department, because we generally see those.
Please.
Follow up. In the last year, how do you know how many cases that have come to the Human Resources Department?
Chairman Hicks, Senator Guru, there's a lot of complaints that come to the Human Resource Division. Now, whether they are similar to complaints that are in this this proposed bill, I would say that in my tenure at A&I, I would maybe say there were 2, and that's from 2015 on, that are really fraud and abuse, waste, fraud, and abuse, something similar to that. I mean, there's issues on how to define that, but what I think this bill is trying to do and trying to look at, I would say, and I can look back and get that to you, but I don't think it's any more than 2.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Bach, you said Chairman Hicks, and which means you're confusing me with Senator Hicks. And I'm flattered, frankly, but he's a little bit insulted over here, so.
I apologize. And when I wrote that down, I wrote it here on here too, Senator Hicks, and it was not Senator Hicks. It was Chairman Kinski, and I apologize.
You can mistake me with somebody better at any time. So, Senator Chairman Hicks or Senator Hicks, did you have anything for Ms. Bach? So, Patricia, I wonder, you see where Senator James is trying to go here, and I want to help him. I don't know that we're going to get there this year, but I wonder if you might do this. This bill has some things are new, some things that are old, some things that are borrowed. And for instance, it looks as though we have an existing statute, this 9/11/101, and it applies to the state, and he's extending it to all political subdivisions, which, you know, is probably a pretty good idea. Maybe you could give us a little bit of a primer. I assume that whatever we're doing is not in any one location in state statute. So if we have a reporting mechanism, but we don't have a hotline, but I do see in the current statute, it reads like my handbook used to say. If you feel you've seen something that's wrong, tell your supervisor. Well, if your supervisor, if you don't think they're going to do anything about it, or if you tried before, then tell another manager or tell HR or, you know, that sort of thing. So what the reporting mechanism is, what the investigative procedures are, if that's in statute, the criminal or civil referral, and if it doesn't rise to civil or criminal, where sort of the remedial aspects are in statute, and maybe it's in a handbook or maybe it's in a department regulation. We do have whistleblower protection. I see that. That's in that same set. And then what provision do we have to notify employees either as they come in or while they're on the job, that if they observe something that's, and then finally, do we have an honor code? That's usually a part of a compliance program, is to say, you know, if you see it, you're obligated to report it. Otherwise, you're in trouble too. I don't know if we have that. And that's not something I would expect right away. That's going to be a fair amount of work, but let's kind of start with what we have on the books now, and then we might identify any gaps. So I think we heard from, and we're going to hear from the Department of Audit. I think they said we don't have a 1-800 number reporting mechanism, and that might be something that's a gap that should be remedied. But that would be helpful, is to just if we could start with where we are now, and then maybe we can shinny into filling in some gaps. I like the idea of extending this to local governments, but I've got some local governments here. They might disagree with me. So thank you, Ms. Bach.
Thank you very much.
Department of Audit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Justin Chavez, Public Funds Administrator, Department of Audit. I've also got with me our interim director, Fred Reif. To answer your question, Mr. Chairman, the Department of Audit does not have a 1-800 number. I am not sure if there are other agencies that might. I suspect that the Medicaid Fraud Investigative Unit does. Workforce Services has an investigative unit for like workers' comp fraud and unemployment fraud. They probably do. But we at the Department of Audit don't have a centralized 1-800 number. But that's not to say that we don't get reports of fraud. We do get emails, we do get phone calls, we do get referrals from other entities in terms of fraud concerns, which leads to the fraud work that we currently do. We also get contacted by law enforcement if somebody, say, contacted their local sheriff or police department with a concern, or DCI, we might get contacted by law enforcement to help out with fraud investigations.
Thank you. So what I was asking of Patricia Bach just got a little more complicated because she is A&I and the HR function is going to have their set of procedures, but Department of Audit has an investigative capacity, Workforce Services has an investigative capacity, Medicaid has. Okay, so it sounds like it's kind of scattered through the bureaucracy. Depends on the agency. Anything for Mr. Chavez?
Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Oh, sorry, I was just gonna say, we didn't have any other prepared testimony, just wanted to be available if any of the committee members had any questions from our testimony from Tuesday or any questions on what our current fraud work looks like.
Okay, thank you. Senator Hicks.
Chairman Kinski, Mr. Chavez, on page 6, subsection 8, it says the director is designee may employ investigative, administrative, and other specialized personnel to carry out the purposes of this section. I know you don't have a big staff in your agent, but have you contemplated what it would take budgetary wise to be able to stand that up? And how many people would you contract out with that to a third-party vendor? How would you do that to employ investigative, administrative, or specialized people to carry out the purposes of the investigations?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, what we proposed in our fiscal note was starting with one position that would be responsible for taking in everything that comes in on the hotline, determining what to do with it, and then being responsible for any follow-up or any investigative work that we would have to do. Currently within our division, we have a few certified fraud examiners. So when we are contacted by law enforcement, it's generally one of those personnel that are assigned to help conduct that investigation. But we started with one, not knowing what the volume would be in terms of complaints coming in and workload. And so that's what we based our fiscal note on, which would be, it comes out to about $240,000 for a biennium.
All right, thank you.
Anything else, Senator Hicks? Okay, the committee has nothing else for you, Mr. Chavez. Thank you. Mr. Gaskell.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
We can.
Great. Mr. Chairman, and committee members, and Senator James, thank you for the opportunity to speak before this committee. I'll be quick. I know you're running out of time. While employed as the Medicaid Program Integrity Manager, I opened an audit on subsidized adoptions in Wyoming. I believe you have that audit announcement and data analyses in an attachment. The audit indicated that numerous children were really lost in the system for many years. I think 5 years at great, in one example, at great expense to the state taxpayer, and even worse, to the emotional trauma caused to these children. These children, by all reason and belief and examination, early examination of the data and medical records, did not meet medical necessity for residential placement and hospitalization. The early audit and the audit announcement indicated this, advanced the audit, expanded the audit, requested medical records, examined the records, and at which point I was terminated in my capacity as Medicaid Program Integrity Director, and the audit was subsequently and immediately terminated by the executive team at the Department of Health. You have spoken about previous cases being prosecuted. I've heard you talk about controls. I've heard you talk about retaliation. In this particular case, I was doing my job as a state servant. Did everything I needed to do, brought the fraud, which is, you'll see just on these 5 cases, is in excess of $2 million. Brought it to the appropriate attention, did everything I needed to do, yet I was terminated. And then shortly thereafter, my wife was terminated as well. There was also a lot of harassment and intimidation through that particular process. And there was no remediation for me and no possibility of any type of relief. I heard you mention that whistleblower status. I don't believe, unless something has changed recently, there is whistleblower protections for state employees within Wyoming. Now, I could be wrong on that. Maybe something's changed since my wife and I had to flee the state. But in this particular case, it is within the Department of Health. Mafuku was aware of this. Mafuku being the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, everyone was aware of this, and yet it was still terminated and pushed under the rug. Unfortunately, I'm a clinician and I'm also an auditor, and perhaps dozens of children's lives, Wyoming's children's lives, have been destroyed as a result of this. And I jumped up and down, I screamed, I yelled, I brought it to the attention of the legislative bodies. The only person that really listened was Senator James, and he is advancing this legislation to address the issue that I'm bringing forth right now. Unfortunately, the 5 kids referenced in the documentation that you have now, lives were likely destroyed or at minimum severely traumatized. Again, those children did not meet medical necessity for inpatient and residential care. The Department of Health knew about this. They authorized subsequent hospitalizations and inappropriate institutionalizations. And again, just these 5 cases of waste, abuse, and fraud cost the state $2 million. Now, I hear what you're saying on the, on controls. I know about controls. I'm an auditor. I hear you saying that other cases were prosecuted. Yes, they were. 2 cases that I was involved with were prosecuted, but only after I was fired and only after I pursued it through the federal government. So yes, this bill is necessary. My life has been destroyed. My wife's life has been destroyed. My career has been destroyed. There was no remediation. There was no avenue to pursue this and to bring it to the attention. And this particular audit and the consequences of this audit are what keeps me awake at night. Just the thought of these children, and I'd like you to leave this hearing with this in mind. These children could have been saved, and a lot of money to the taxpayers could have been saved if this bill were in place and I had been protected and been able to complete the audit to its logical conclusion. It was just easier to terminate me. And trust me, I tried every legal remedy there is So there is no legal remedy. There is no relief for a state employee who's trying to do the right thing and try and, protect the public. So please review the documentation I gave you. Take that documentation into consideration when you're considering SB 65, because there is another side to it other than the questions and concerns that I've heard you verbalize. There are consequences. And Senator James, I think, made it very clear that if this went to a criminal proceeding or a civil proceeding, now my name was out there and I'm okay. I didn't need anonymity. If I had anonymity, perhaps I wouldn't have been terminated. My life wouldn't have been destroyed. But the important thing is that the waste, abuse, and fraud should have been brought to the surface and investigated. When I say there was no controls, of course there were no controls, because my boss fired me and then terminated the audit. And I had no remedy from that point forward. So I welcome any questions from the committee, but this is a serious matter. $2 million pays for a lot of teachers, a lot of healthcare, and that was just a sample of what we found in our preliminary audit findings.
Thank you, Mr. Gaskell. So without revisiting everything in your situation, the question is, I guess, what I'm hearing is I heard you say you pursued every legal remedy, and the only remedy is this bill. So I pulled a statute book. I'm looking at 911-103, discrimination against certain employees prohibited, civil action against employer. No state employer may discharge, discipline, or retaliate against an employee by unreasonably altering the terms, location, or conditions of employment because the employee acting in good faith and within the scope of duties of employment, 1, reports in writing to the employer what the employee has reasonable cause to believe is a demonstration of fraud, waste, or gross mismanagement state government office, or 2, reports in writing to the employer what the employee has reasonable cause to believe is a violation of a law, regulation, code, or rule adopted under the laws of this state of the United States. 3, reports in writing to the employer what the employee has reasonable cause to believe is a condition or practice would put at risk the health or safety of that employee or any other individual, and so forth. Goes on to say, subsection C, any employee who is discharged, disciplined, or otherwise penalized by a state employer in violation of this section may, after exhausting all available administrative remedies, bring a civil action within 90 days of the date of the final administrative determination or within 90 days after the violation, whichever is later, in district court for the judicial district in which the violation is alleged to have occurred, where the state employer has its office. An employee's recovery from any action shall be limited to reinstatement of the previous job, payment of back wages, reestablishment of employee benefits to which they had been entitled. In addition, court may allow them court costs, reasonable attorney's fees to be taxed by the court. So did you do that?
Yes, we did. I had several attorneys do that. The state was protected through sovereign immunity, and my discharge was without reason. It was they said I didn't meet the terms of probation. It was in fact a couple of days before my 1-year anniversary. And therefore there was no documentation. They just were mute. And when we took it to court, there was I was unsuccessful due to sovereign immunity. You couldn't sue the state.
Well, I guess I'd have to check with a lawyer then, because this statute reads like it's a waiver of sovereign immunity to me.
That would be incorrect. In reality, it doesn't work that way, unfortunately.
Okay, well.
I did win on the previous 2 cases. I did have to take it to federal court and through a KETAM action, and 2 of those cases ended in my favor. This one was not pursued through a federal relief, but there was no state relief during 2016.
Okay, Senator Guru. Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I always find it frustrating when I see the government bureaucracy do these things. Your case is not unusual. I'm aware of one that occurred in the last couple of years where our state agencies did a similar type of retaliation, not to an employee. My concern is that's a miscarriage of justice. And I'm not sure that just by adopting this statute ever will accomplish that miscarriage of justice that you may have been subject to at the hands of the government. Maybe, maybe not. It's been my experience that when the government wants to bully somebody, they have all the tools and the ability and the financial will to do so. And so I'm not convinced under your scenario that this piece of legislation would have given you the remedy that you sought, because miscarriage of justice is an entire different section of the system. And so I'm concerned what happened to you. I've seen it happen in other cases. I just don't know that this would get us there, because it's really a separate issue. It's about government overreach. It's about government using their power for a foregone conclusion. And so, Mr. Chairman, I'm very empathetic, Mark, to your case. I understand that you're not the only victim of this, but I'm not sure this piece of legislation would have remedied the situation that you incurred. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hicks. Senator Hicks, I'm not ready to jump to that conclusion. I'm reading a statute that clearly provides a remedy that actually is called out in the bill. The bill leaves the statute intact and simply extends it to local employers. And he said he had an administrative hearing. He said he went to state district court. He said he went to federal court. I don't know what more remedy could be offered, but and it could all be the case, but we're hearing one side of the story. Probably there's a personnel file that we can't even talk about because it's confidential. Personnel files are confidential. So, but I'll follow up with Senator James and with some of the documents and see what else we might conclude. We have two other folks here from the public. Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to acknowledge what you said, that yes, this may not be the do-all end-all of the bureaucracy and what happens to people. However, this does put into place accountability. It will make sure that the people that are found guilty are held accountable for what they've done. And that's just, that's the other edge of this sword. If we're gonna make progress in making sure that we start holding government accountable for what they do to the people, for how they handle situations like Mr. Gaskell's, then we have to start somewhere, and accountability in this bill will do that.
So Senator James, your bill calls out the exact statute I just read. I don't see your bill doesn't change anything in regards to this, but I do have to say this, in fairness to whoever were his employers and his supervisors, I'm not ready to conclude that there was something that was done wrong there. That's a serious thing to say. He did get his day in, according to him, state district court and in federal court. So I just want to be careful, because there are other people involved, state employees, that may in fact have done the right thing. I do not have enough facts to conclude that there was an injustice done here and that somebody in state government should be held accountable. I want to be very careful about that, because there are people's lives and reputations on the line, and they can't tell us their side of the story because it's a confidential personnel matter unless all of those files have already been released in the course of Mr. Gaskell's 2 court actions, in which case the confidentiality would have been waived. I want to be very careful. I hope you understand. I don't doubt your sincerity, but I want to be fair to everybody involved. We've heard from one gentleman and his allegations, but he had his day in court, in district court and federal court. I don't know what more we can do. But so it's something you and I probably should sit down with LSO staff and walk through this statute, try and figure it out.
Mr. Chairman, one thing I know we could do is we could take away government's immunity. That would have probably helped out a lot in this case, since that was the reason why he wasn't able to win in those cases. That was the main reason. If we take away government's immunity, that's a lot of accountability right there.
Senator James, and I don't want to argue the law with you. You might want to go back to LSO and ask them whether 9/11/103 takes away the government's immunity, because it pretty clearly gives the employee a right of action against the government. So if you check with LSO, I don't want to argue with you in a public, it's just not, it wouldn't be appropriate, but you should seek direction from legal staff. Senator Guru.
Mr. Chairman, I just wonder if there was any other public testimony.
Yeah, please. Thank you, Senator James. We have some other folks here. Mr. Winnie. And so if you just grab a socially distanced seat there from Senator James and turn a mic on and pull it close.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie, Sublette County. As I look at more at the discussion you just had, the bill seems to focus on penalties and things like that for people that transgress in some way. And I'd like to offer you a somewhat different viewpoint of things. And it comes out of my own experience with a particular school district. Wyoming doesn't have a routine method of going in and auditing and looking at things to see if it's being done correctly. A couple sessions ago, there was a bill in the Senate Corporations Committee about special districts with regard to, I think it was cemetery districts in particular, and some money had been misappropriated.
Mr. Winnie, I'm sorry. I just didn't need to interrupt you for just 1 minute. Right off the bat, I'm a little bit confused. I was mayor of Sheridan for 10 years and I had 10 years worth of audits from the state. So you said we don't have a means of routine audits. We were audited every year. Senator Guru, how about your commission and city council days?
4 years in the city council, 6 years in the county commission, and now here. And yes, stood for audit every year, every account, every time. Yes.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Hicks.
work for a special district, and we have both audits and budget reviews based on the level of expenditures on our budget. So if we go over $1 million, we go through a full-blown audit every year.
So, Mr. Winnie, I thought you said we have no routine means of auditing of government.
In
So
this
maybe it
particular,
is-
in the particular case was a cemetery district where embezzlement had occurred. And as I spoke and listened to the testimony, one of Senator Scott's concerns was there is no method of going in and looking at these guys. I have not done a detailed review of every avenue within the state. But when I look at things like what I saw in the particular school district, I didn't see anybody looking. And in the case of the school district, there was an instructional facilitator that was being misused. And state statute requires them to spend 75% of their time in their specialty field, and that was not true. I wrote a letter to the Department of Audit and included information. I'd done a number of investigations in my time in the Navy, and it was that quality of information, and nobody did anything with it. At any rate, what I wanted to get to is simply the perhaps one of the other avenues that should go with this bill has to do with how the state, in fact, maybe it's something like an inspector general or something like that. I'm sure there are some audits going on, but like I said, this one particular case a couple years ago in the Senate Corporations Committee, it was clear there was no routine looking at, I believe it was cemetery districts. And so that's perhaps another prong that you could use to get to the same place that this bill is looking at. Subject to your questions, thank you very much.
Thank you. Senator Guru. So, Mr. Winnie, instructional facilitators, I'm not an expert on school finance. I was on the recalibration committee in 2017, chaired it again this past year. Instructional facilitators, as a follow-up, maybe you'll give us a citation to what statute you believe was being violated, that an instructional facilitator was not spending 75% of their time engaged in something or other, because we have a model. We then take a block grant and give it to the districts and they spend it as they please.
Instructional facilitators are not covered under the block grant. It's a special category of funding. The state provides 75% of their funding and 25% comes from the school district. And along with that is a requirement for 75% of their time in their specialty. I'll have to go look up the citation, but I can find it for you.
But it's been rolled up into the block grant as of 3 years ago, 4 years ago.
This predates that.
Okay, and so you believe that to be fraudulent and it wasn't responded to by the district or by the state?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. I didn't have any questions. Do you have anything else, Senator Guru? Let's go back to Mr. Chavez. Can you tell us for school districts about audits and about cemetery districts about audits?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So we have two sections within the Public Funds Division. We have a school finance audit section and a state and local government audit section. On the school side, we have 5 auditors there who are responsible for doing regular audits of the components that go into the school funding model. And so on a rotating basis, we go out and audit every school district on components of the funding model to determine if the information or the data being used in the funding model is accurate. In terms of cemetery districts, they would fall under our local government audit section. And so we do routine audits of local governments. Where the issue lies is that section only has 6 people and there are 500 special districts and another 50 towns that fall under that purview. And we just don't have the staff to get to everybody. But we do regular audits of special districts.
Is it your expectation that all audits will stop all embezzlement?
Mr. Chairman, no. And in fact, your typical audit is not designed to track down fraud or embezzlement, just based on the nature of them and their objective.
Okay, so by what means, if there was an embezzlement, and evidently did this result in a criminal prosecution of some kind? Do you know, Mr. Winnie?
Sir.
Could you please come up to the mic? Did this embezzlement result in a criminal prosecution?
Well, it wasn't embezzlement. It was misuse of an instructional facilitator. I wrote a letter to the director.
I thought you said there was a cemetery district embezzlement.
Oh, I don't remember the details of that. I do remember Senator Scott being quite upset about it, but I don't know the details. I've just heard the testimony in the Senate Corporations Committee.
Okay, well, so you're repeating something that was repeated. Embezzlement's pretty serious, and if you're going to use that the basis for the idea that somehow the state's falling down on its job, you ought to have a little bit more detail than it's something you heard in another hearing, Bill. That's me. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chavez. Let's go to, we've got somebody here from the Wyoming Association of Municipalities. Mr. McLaren, or is it McLaren? It's good to see you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. My name is Bob McLaurin. I'm with WHAM. I'm here to speak on this aspect of the bill that affects local government. My comments don't relate to Medicaid or any of the federal
Okay.
stuff. Local elected officials we work diligently to prevent waste, fraud, and abuse. Local city council members and city managers. They are very protective of the public's money and work diligently to make sure that the public's money are spent in an effective and efficient manner. As a former city manager, I've fired people. We've prosecuted people and sent people to jail for waste, fraud, and abuse. So we take this issue very, very seriously. However, WHAM is opposed to this bill. We do believe that the statutes, existing statutes, are sufficient to cover this issue. We're also concerned that, as you've heard previously from the Department of Audit, their budget has been cut and now you're giving them more work. So if they're going to be doing this, what are they not going to be doing? We do agree with the statements made last Tuesday that the best way to prevent waste and embezzlement are strong internal controls. And like you, Mr. Chairman, we had an audit every year. Spent upwards of $30,000-$40,000 to make sure that our internal controls were sufficient and safe. And when the auditor found weak internal controls, we would take affirmative action to correct that. Finally, I would say that we are concerned about the definition of waste. It's too much sand on the street. If somebody's accused of putting too much water on the park. So as you said on Tuesday, waste can be a subjective issue. So we stand opposed to waste, fraud, and abuse, and we also stand opposed to this bill. Be happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Guru, Senator Hicks. So Bob, you're a professional manager, and you've had experience managing outside the state of Wyoming?
Yes, sir.
So I will tell you just something relating to what Mr. Winnie said, that we don't have an IG function. To me, that is of a concern. And you made reference to something that you as a professional administrator knew enough to do. I knew enough because my dad, actually, I'd been elected mayor, and he said, David, the first thing you do is get a financial integrity audit. And I said, well, we have audits. And he says, well, it's not a financial integrity audit. You need to find out if somebody's stealing. Because 2 years from now, if it comes to light, it'll be your problem, even if it started before you got there. And so we hired an accounting firm that went through, and they couldn't find stealing, but they did exactly what you said. They looked at all our internal controls and gave us a list of recommendations to hold down the prospect. That's not routine. That's not a state requirement that people really look at their internal controls. And does that concern you? I mean, it depends on having somebody with your insight of the city to know to do that sort of thing.
Well, we have relied on our auditors over the years, and basically followed their recommendations with respect to where we needed to beef up internal controls, where we need to do additional work to make sure that the public's money was spent. But audits do not always, you're correct, audits do not always prevent embezzlement. The town that I worked in, there was an employee they just discovered he had embezzled a bunch of money, and we had done an audit every year. So it's something you got to continue to work on and keep looking for.
But you asked for an internal controls analysis. The auditors don't do, in my experience, City Sheridan, the auditors did not do internal control review unless you paid them extra.
Well, in the town of Jackson, we got a review of internal controls.
Okay. All right. Anything else from Mr. McLaren? No, thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Committee, I'd like to go back to Mr. Chavez here just real quick, if we may. Mr. Chavez, you still there?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Do your audits of these agencies include a review of their internal controls?
Mr. Chairman, yes, that's actually required by audit standard, that you look at internal controls that are significant to your audit objective.
Okay. Well, that's helpful. Thank you. I did not realize that. Is that a requirement of state statute, or it's just an audit standard?
Mr. Chairman, for us, it's a requirement by generally accepted government audit standards. And then statute requires that we follow those standards in conducting our audits. So effectively, statute requires that we do that.
All right, thank you. Anybody else? Anything from anybody? Please. Tom, could you reach over and turn that mic off before we're, there we go. Thank you.
Good morning,
Welcome.
Chairman. My name is Bill Fortner, Representative Bill Fortner from House District 52, Campbell County. I'm a co-signer on this bill. And the reason I did co-sign on this bill is because there's a lot of things that I've found since I've been down here and things that I've required on in Campbell County, such as the 1% revenue way back at the beginning. Documentation I could get at best was pie charts. So anyways, going back into the revenue here in Cheyenne, I learned that there's a variety of can accounts scattered all over here and there. And basically there's like only 5 guys in Cheyenne that actually know what how the accounting system for Cheyenne works. And I believe until we know that kind of stuff, we're going to be upside down on the school funding, as well as accountability of government at every phase from Cheyenne all the way into local government. I believe that there's a huge gap between the citizens and government itself. Government request is pretty specific. You got to go for every little thing you want. You got to have a request for. And I guess that's all right, but at the end of the day, I believe you should be able to just open up an account or a site online and be able to access all the information that you need to know about the state, the counties, and the cities, and we do not have that. That's one of my biggest concerns for signing on this bill. We've been down debating the budget all the way up till like 9 o'clock last night, and my opinion on that is we're just putting the Band-Aid on everything and wait until next year for things to get worse instead of actually fixing the problem. I believe if it's come to the point in time that we need to do some constitutional amendments through the ballot process, I believe we need to do that. If the Constitution is the biggest holdup that we have, and it was established in the early 1900s or late 1900s or 1800s, I believe maybe it's time to make some adjustments to the Constitution to allow for better transparency, to allow to get back to where government, the entities of the House and the Senate control the spending of the government, not the Wyoming Supreme Court. I believe those are things we're going to have to face head on to make a difference. And I think what we're going through right now in the budget process is just kicking the can down the road. But I believe it all stems back to transparency, truthful and honest. Until we get that, I don't think the citizens are going to be happy with the people that represent them. That's why I'm here today. Thank you.
Questions, committee members? Senator
Just
Guru?
a comment. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, morning. You said you signed on to this bill because of reasons you stated about the state. I think what you meant was the state, but you said Cheyenne. I assume you meant the state budget. And only 5 people know it, and we need to fix it, and we need to do better with that. What exactly do you see in this bill that's going to help that problem?
Well, I noticed one of the biggest problems when I got down here, and I didn't learn it from anybody inside the LSO or anybody from inside the body, whether it's the House or the Senate. I learned it from an organization that we're saying that we're near broke and we got to make all of it. We even talked about taking the funding away from the prison last night, the construction account, and give it over to the school system because we're strapped there. But without a doubt, we're not broke. We got $28 billion in reserves and investments and another $2 billion in AML funds. So, I mean, that's the kind of transparency that the citizens need to know. They need to have all that at their fingertips, just like I do. Did that answer your question?
It did. But my suggestion, and it's a suggestion, would be to go through those documents, and actually I'm more than happy to have an offline conversation with you anytime to help you get that information in, because I couldn't agree with you more. When I started, I was in your shoes, and as a freshman senator, I felt exactly the same way. The budget was a complete mystery. And those, and all the, you know, the goldenrod and all those documents with all those numbers were all Greek to me, and little by little, I'm not there yet, but I'm still working on it, but I can definitely give you some tips on how to illuminate some of that. So I'll be more than happy to do it. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you,
Thank you.
Representative.
So Mr. Fortner, on the bill, which is what we're here for, I hear your statement. I agree with everything in your statement. We're spending too much money. We're kicking the can down the road. I've been frustrated for the 5 years I've been here, but on the bill, in particular, an employee, you said the public needs to be able to just open up and tell right where the dollars are going. How does that relate to this bill, though? This bill is about whistleblowers and reporting of fraud.
And I can tell you that I worked at a coal mine for 20 years.
Worked where?
I say I worked at a coal mine for 20 years.
Okay.
There was people that reported safety violations, and within the year they would be gone because of safety violations. It didn't take them long to get to weed out those people. Our motto at the mine I worked for is safety first, until it got in the way of production. Then safety went out the window. Guy got hurt. He was reported to management, went all the way into arbitration, and then this guy loses his job. The guy that reported it loses his job on a safety violation. And it didn't just happen once, it happened a lot. So I think that's a pretty good statement in this bill, that we need to have that in there. It used to be, before, we used to have arbitrations and stuff in the workforce. Now we don't have that. It's gone. So I
So he
mean,
went to arbitration. He wasn't canned without any due process. It sounds like he appealed. And you said he went to arbitration.
yeah, arbitration of management.
Was that a
and
union
one employee.
contract?
Pardon me?
Was that part of a union contract, the arbitration?
Well, it was sort of set up on the union basis as soon as they broke the unions back in the early 70s in Campbell County. Basically, they left a lot of that union policy in place, including the insurances and the wages, was to
Okay.
keep the.
Mr. Chairman,
So Senator Hicks,
can we get back to the bill?
well, I'm trying to get back to the bill. I'm trying to understand what he's saying. So in the mine, you had arbitration. In the state, we have the right to appeal any discharge, discipline, or retaliation that you believe was wrongful. You have administrative rights, and then you can go to district court. You can recover back wages, benefits. You can get attorney's fees, and that's actually still in this bill. So what more would we do? I'm just confused as to what more you would want.
Well, actually, I like I said in the beginning, I'm here for transparency on the money into things, on how the operations work. I know at the local level, you have a hard time getting statements and deposits and things of that sort for looking at how the budget is ran, what the money is spent on. That's the transparency I'm looking for.
All right. Thank you. Anything else from Mr.
Did
Fortner?
that clear anything up for you?
You know, that's good. Thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Fortner. Appreciate it. Anything else? You okay, Larry?
Yeah.
Okay enough, anyway. All right. No further testimony. Back to the committee. We're done with public testimony. Back to the committee. What's the pleasure of the committee? Is there a second?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I will second the bill for discussion. There's some things in here I really like. Let me point those out, Mr. Chairman, if I can. I really like the section on page 8 on the definition of waste. My only concern is there, as we get down there, when it gets to the languages, it says incurring unnecessary cost resulting from inefficient and ineffective practices and systems and control, that I will spend my whole time when I drive home every weekend on the cell phone reporting all those snowplows going up and down the road on dry roads with their lights flashing and no wind blowing and no snow. I might be the biggest user of this provision in there because there is tremendous waste, and as somebody that has worked in government a good portion of my life, but I don't know how we get to the issue through the bill. Mr. Chairman, I think there's some really good nuggets in here. I think it needs some work. I would like to work with the sponsor of the bill and look maybe we want to explore an inspector general. I've got other concerns on here. Let's get to the provision where we roll in all of those special districts and municipalities that were referenced in counties. In the bill is there's no cost recovery mechanism for the state. So if the state bears the cost to go into a local government and spends a significant amount of resources to do an investigation and all that stuff, that burden fully falls on the state. I think those entities that are involved in that should have some type of cost recovery mechanism. So, Mr. Chairman, I think there's some good stuff in here. I'm concerned about some of the flow of the things. I'd like to continue to work with the sponsor on the bill. I think there might be some other remedies that we need to explore out there. But at this time, I'll be a no on the bill, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Guru?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too, thank the good bringer of the bill. And I understand waste, fraud, and abuse are there. Although it's funny, I've been in political debates with people for 20 years saying that waste, fraud, and abuse are not line items on, I've ever seen on a government sheet anywhere on the budget, but I know it happens.
Is your mic on, Mike?
What's that?
Is your mic on, Mike?
Yes.
Okay.
My mic's on, Mike. Yes. So I also know that waste, fraud, and abuse occurs. Actually, the good representative from Wham and I thought that there was some waste in our cemetery years and years ago, and we decided to get rid of the sexton and turn it over to our Parks and Rec department. They're straightened out, and we fired him. One thing we forgot to do, we fired him, is we forgot to have him turn in his map. We thought we had a map of the cemetery, but we didn't. We fired the guy that had one. That ran into a little problem the first time we tried to bury somebody. We missed anyway, but so I've known it happens, and I too have been in cases where we've tried to do a lot about it. I guess though this bill, the troubling thing with me about this bill is that I think it assumes a level of something, and just the way it's crafted, I just don't think I can't get comfortable with it. You want to do a hotline, I'm there with you. You want to take certain parts of this and put it out and try to add to what we have, I'm with you all the way. I too would be happy to sit down and talk to you, but this seems like a 357 solution to a 22 caliber problem that I think is just a bit, I'm having a hard time getting through it. I'd actually feel better about it if it had a section in there that said that public employees, the vast number of which work hard and do well. And I know the good senator knows this, but who can call in and say when good things are happening, when we can have it go the other way or both ways. Because actually, I think that happens far more than this. So I too am a no. But I want to try to work to try to come up with something. I think just based on the testimony I heard, obviously something's not quite right there. We've got all these laws, and the good chairman, reads them off, and we seem to have a lot of remedies here. But maybe we need an inspector general or something to have some central location to have all this together. I don't know, but don't see it here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. I too I can't be a yes, just the bill needs work just in terms of, and it's legal work. It's getting the lawyers to draft this thing in a way that I think somebody used the word flow. And I think a good place to begin is with whatever memo we get from Patricia Bach so that we clearly understand what our existing processes are. I do want to say this about the word fraud. In the common law, and even today in court and it comes in today, modern court pleadings, you can sue somebody and say, you were negligent and I was hurt. That's enough. You can kind of lay out a few facts. But if you allege fraud under the common law, you had an obligation to allege it with particularity, because it's such a serious thing, because it tends to stick, whether it sticks or not, it sticks. And so common law, you had to say the date, the time, the place. You had to be very, very specific and very, very clear about it. And I just like to be very balanced in my rhetoric on these things because there are bad apples, but there are a lot of very good, hardworking people. And I just want to be fairly measured in my rhetoric. So I don't know enough about this particular situation to conclude that it's representative of all situations or of state government in general. So I too will pledge to work with you on the bill to try and get it right. We have some elements missing in state law and we have some good things in state law. But we've got to identify those gaps and fill them in, and where it needs bolstered, we need to bolster it. So with that, Karen, if you call the roll, please.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Kinski. Senator Guru. Senator Hicks. Would you like me to leave it open for Senator Steinmetz and Senator Perkins, or would you like me to report them
Certainly.
as excused?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
Okay. And Vice Chairman Kinski.
No.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
just one suggestion. I would like to work with Senator James. I think this has enough merit in it. I think that we want to see if we can have the Appropriations Committee take this up as an interim topic and start working with all the parties. And see if we can do that. I think there's some merit to do it.
Well, I'm hoping that the topics come from the committees instead of the management council from now on.
Just kidding.
Yeah, I think this would be a great interim topic. There's clearly some work that needs to be done. Senator James?
Mr. Chairman, I would like, the first year I brought this, I did try and get it submitted to one of the committees and it didn't get submitted. So if we could get it submitted to this time, I would appreciate that.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
the appropriate mechanism is to have this conversation with the Senator Driscoll, who's chairman of the Corporations Committee. I would certainly support the Corporations Committee take a look at this. Again, we do not want management council deciding this topic. But that, if we can get that into their list of potential subjects, that is the absolute best way to handle this issue. Because I think it is a big issue. We need to plug the dike where the dike's leaking and fix the problem. So, thank you, Mr.
You
Chairman.
bet. We're trying to get it so management council's not the boss of us anymore. We decide our topics and they tell us whether they've got the resources, but we decide our topics.
That would be
All right.
good.
Thank you, Senator James. Thanks for all your hard work. Greatly appreciate it. Meeting adjourned.